Wow. My name is David Devan, and I have the pleasure of being the General Director and President of Opera Philadelphia, and thrilled to be with you all here at the Guggenheim in New York. Wonderful to have this panel with me. Missy Mazzoli, our composer, Royce Vavrek, our librettist, Steve Osgood, you're the composer, conductor, and James Starr, our director. And two shout outs, Nathan Gunn is here, who is our director of the American Repertoire Council. Welcome, Nathan, thank you. And a special shout out to the co-commissioner of this work, Beth Morrison Projects, and Beth Morrison is with us today. So, Royce, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we just heard?
Yeah, so you actually heard the very first moments of the opera, so lights up. That you met Bess McNeill. She is our protagonist. She is a young Scottish woman living on the Isle of Skye in the 1970s who has gone to her Calvinist church to ask permission from the elders there, the Council of Elders, to marry a Norwegian offshore oil rigger named Jan. And so directly following that aria is the response. But you'll have to come to Opera Philadelphia to see that.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying his name was Jan. I was a little confused. So there we are. This work emanated from a film by the same name, Breaking the Waves. There have been a number of people curious of why we're all writing and producing a work based on this film. And Royce, I know this film has lived in your mind and in your heart for quite some time. And could you talk to us a little bit about how that film affected you and why you thought you might talk to Missy about it being an opera?
This is my favorite film of all time. I found it, or it found me, when I was 14 years old. I grew up on a farm in northern Alberta, Canada, where we didn't have great access to cinema like this, certainly not in our cinema. So I encountered it on VHS in 1997, and I remember seeing a little tiny fragment of the film on the Golden Globe Awards that year, where somehow this film was nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama, and it changed my life that 15 seconds, where Jan asks Bess to take other lovers, and it blew my mind. It absolutely I was like, this is the kind of cinema that I want and I'm hungry for, and it exists. This is the kind of storytelling that just grabbed me. And so when I saw it, it was everything I wanted and more when I got to see the full 2 hours plus. It is a film that deals with religion and sexuality, two ideas and that I love, and it exists at sort of a nexus point of those two things, and explores a sort of alternative idea of what sexuality in marriage can be, or at least at that 14-year-old point of my life, it just seemed wild. You're like, oh my goodness, a husband is asking his wife to go and find other lovers. And then really, when I explored the film and understood that it all came from this really, really exciting place of goodness, or this very genuine place of goodness. It illuminated something very, very special, and it talked about the church and this very particular and singular story. But it also, I think, talks about just the general place that religion is holds in our society. So yeah, it was this piece that came to me at a very, very important point in my artistic development. At 14 years old, I guess I was sort of searching for kindred sensibilities, and Lars von Trier he represented the most audacious of storytellers. And my earliest plays were all really, I tried to be as audacious as possible. I wrote a play called Motherless Pig, in which a pig escapes her northern Albertan farm and longing to be a celebrity in New York, and ends up being a prostitute and slaughtered. And before I visited New York, I wrote a play about a nun that beats a midget to death on the Upper West Side. And so
who hired you?
And I went to a Catholic school from kindergarten to grade 12. So these were pretty crazy. And they were all done within the Catholic school system. So yeah, religion and sex and all these wild stories were all informed by the movies. That was the principal kind of art that I had access to. And so Bess and Jan have been dear, dear, dear friends for almost 20 years now.
And you're spreading the love with all of us.
Yeah.
So Missy, Royce comes to you and says, I got a great idea for an opera. And what do you say? What do you think?
I was like, are you crazy? The answer is yes, in case you're wondering. No, at first I said, no, we can't adapt Breaking the Waves because I loved the film so much. It's such a great film. It's one of my favorite films as well. And I thought, why adapt something that's already so amazing? But it was an idea that wouldn't leave me alone. And as the months went on, after Royce first proposed this, I just couldn't get this idea out of my head. And it was a story that I felt resonated with me, but that I could hear the music for these characters. It helps that there's no underscoring in the film. There's some musical moments, but there's no sort of emotional swells at key moments that tell you how to feel. So I was really left to use my imagination and to create a world for these characters. And one of the things that I love about the film is that each of the characters is infinitely deep and incredibly complicated. And I feel that opera's superpower is sort of in creating that subtext and saying more than one thing at once. So a singer can be saying one thing and then the orchestra is saying something completely different. And I feel like that works really well for this story where there's so much going on within each character.
And part of this exploration was through your residency at Opera Philadelphia. So Opera Philadelphia has a composer in residence program. So on any given day, there are 3 composers in residence at Opera Philadelphia, and they're each with us for 3 years. And it's artist-centered residency. What the artist needs, the artist gets, to explore their talent for writing opera. And so this debate was happening just before and during the composer in residence program. So this opera didn't come into being by, just a typical way of go to composer, ask the commission work. This came out of the organic working together in this residency. And it also afforded us a wonderful, very rich development process. Because the residency, thanks to the funding of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, allows us a great number of resources to put towards each composer. So we went on a journey. And one of the great things that happened during this process was an aria or a duet was born out of this one of the early workshop processes. So Missy, do you want to introduce this and maybe we'll hear a little bit about it? And we can talk more about your residency after that.
Okay, so the duet you're about to hear is called Map of Yuans Body. And this is the big love song of the opera. This is right after they're married. Bess and Jan have a short period of true marital bliss, and Bess experiences a sexual awakening. And the fun, wonderful, crazy thing about this character, Bess, is that she's sort of profound in her innocence. And so the challenge for Royce, I think, was to create text for her that was simple yet interesting enough to carry an aria forward. And I think this aria is a beautiful example of how brilliant he is at that. So here we go, Map of Yuans Body.
Great, maestro, cast. Welcome back, Steve. He has the most stage management to do tonight. So one of the first things we did in exploring this opera was we put the two of you on a plane, and off to Scotland you went. And we had a conversation about how important place was in this work. And so we wanted our creative team to explore that and to smell the air and to touch the soil, and have some thoughts about maybe that informing the work in a meaningful way. These are Royce's great shots of their little adventure. Missy, do you want to talk to us a little bit about landscape and what that means for your music?
Sure. So when Opera Philadelphia sent us to Scotland, we were super excited. It was really fun, but we didn't know what to expect. We didn't have a sort of set plan of what we wanted to get out of the trip. We really just wanted to go to the Isle of Skye. We knew we were firmly setting this opera in the Isle of Skye, and just wanted to see what happened. We had as a sort of outline of destinations, we wanted to go to all the places where the film had been shot. So this church is actually the church in the film, which is we had to sneak into. It's abandoned, you're not supposed to go into. We had to climb several fences to get there. But what really ended up being inspiring was the physical, natural landscape itself. It was my first time in Scotland, and I was really struck by the sharp contrasts and just the sort of violence of the landscape. So you'll have like these rolling, green, lush meadows that sort of end in this plummet off of a cliff. There'll be these like rock formations that just jut out of the earth. And it felt to me like a very loud landscape. It's a very quiet place, but the landscape seemed to be sort of like screaming at me. And it was actually in one of these walks, that one right there, by Neast Point, that I was like, I know how the opera is going to begin. And it begins with that sort of massive chord that you heard at the beginning of His Name is Jan. So that it just it kind of like worked its way into all parts of the piece. And there are also, we also discovered sort of two Scottish musical traditions that also found their way into the piece. One is Gaelic Psalms, the Gaelic Psalm tradition of the Highlands, which is a way of singing in church that is very particular to that area. Members in a congregation sing a melody that they all know, but they don't try to line up with each other. So the effect is this like massive wash of sound that's sort of together, but sort of not. And another thing is just bagpipes. I love bagpipes. And that sort of worked its way into the piece, not in any sort of overt way, but really into there are no actual bagpipes in the piece, but in the orchestrations, there's a sort of dense harmonic language that actually comes out of just listening to a lot of bagpipe music.
Wonderful. And Royce, talk to us a little bit about language. You spent a lot of time there. We've talked a lot in the development about, are we using an accent? How's the authenticity of this come through in their words? And I think a lot of that was informed when you were on this trip, so
Absolutely.
Please.
Well, I had two amazing documents that I got to work with as sort of primary sources. One was literally the primary source, which is the screenplay, and the second being the film. So I did have Lars's and he worked with the actors to sort of not improvise, but they got the words in their mouths and made them sort of their own. And so those were amazing. And then we did take some of the text that we knew was going to be for Scottish characters, in particular, the two arias that Bess's mom sings, and you'll hear one of those a little later. And we were at a bed and breakfast on the Isle of Skye, and we had the woman who was about 50 years old, so the perfect profile for Bess's mom. We recorded her saying my words, which was so cool to actually hear what my text and that I was imagining for this Scottish woman, what it would actually sound coming from her mouth. And so little things like that were unbelievably informative, and we've been working with a coach in the room, so we do have Scottish diction police, a Scottish diction policeman, so language was really important. The other thing is that Lars loves these international companies. He assembles all these amazing international groups of artists to come together. And so a lot of his stuff is sort of an imagined landscape. And I think that what we really wanted to do was firmly root the piece in Scotland. And we knew that Jan was Scandinavian. I guess we could deduce it because Stellan Skarsgård played him in the film that he's Swedish, but I always imagined him being Norwegian, so he became Norwegian in the opera. I just love that the two cultures, the Norwegian oil culture and the Scottish oil culture, it seemed that there was a parallel there that I wanted to play with. So we really tried to use the clues from the film to create and to understand the language.
And the accent is quite different in the Isle of Skye than it is for Glasgow, for example.
Oh my goodness,
so
yes.
it's a far more rolling sound. And I know we spend a lot of time. We don't want you to come to the opera and go, wow, they got a really good diction coach. It has to be natural. And so we actually have a coach that is an expert on that specific accent and dialect. And it's been a joy for you guys to work with.
It's been awesome.
We're going to hear about Dr. Richardson, or from Dr. Richardson, a complex character. Do one of you want to set up?
All right. So we meet Dr. Richardson at the top of the second act. The piece is in 3 acts, but there's only 1 intermission. So this is you'll come back from intermission, you'll have had your champagne, and Dr. Richardson appears. And he is the doctor in charge of Jan after an accident renders him paralyzed, and he is sent home from the rig. And this is his sort of plea with Bess, that she is being a little... there's something in her psychology that's just not quite right. She believes that this prayer, she has prayed to God to send Jan home because she just can't stand that he's away for so long. He's been gone for about 4 weeks. And so she believes that her power has summoned him home. And he's like, no, an accident. He got hit in the head by a drill. And so this is him trying to talk sense into Bess, which she misconstrues later on in the opera as some sort of like sexual something, yeah.
Come on. Great. Well, let's hear it, shall we, Maestro?
God
While Steve joins us, I want to just point out that the cast, this is the world premiere cast you're hearing sing each of these roles tonight. We'll give them a round of applause at the end, but it's truly, we're privileged that they take a day off from their rehearsal. Well, actually, it wasn't a day off. Y'all rehearsed early this morning, wasn't it? Who's running this place anyways? Their evening off to be with us. Steve Osgood, our conductor, a couple of questions. And the first one is, we were able to have a workshop with a full orchestra.
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about the responsibility of preparing the work to get it from the page to the stage musically, and maybe some of the value of having that workshop to your process.
Well, this was back in January of this year. We had about 5 days together down in Philadelphia. And there were two goals at that point. It was the first time that I had been involved in the process. There had been several workshops prior to that, but it was my first time on the ground with the piece. And we had just received Act 3, newly composed. Act 2, I think it had some revisions, and Act 1 had been orchestrated. So in the course of that 5 days, there were multiple goals. One was to kind of get a sense of the full piece now from beginning to end, how the arc of it works. And then in 4 sessions with the orchestra, have a chance to hear Act 1. And I had been in Los Angeles in the fall conducting, what's it called? A song from the Uproar. when Missy was sitting out in the lobby of Red Cat, orchestrating as we were teching. And I'd come out on break and say, how's it going? She's like, oh, it's great, or oh, I'm working on this chord, or stuff. So I would walk by her during that process, and then finally we had this material on hand to finally get to play with. I think it's the workshop process is, I think, for me, one of the most magical aspects of developing new work. You are together in a room without the pressure of there is an opening night that is imminent, which has its own excitement and time pressure for you. But you've got this time in which you can explore whatever you want. And perhaps there is going to be a performance, an open rehearsal or something at the end. But it is the room, and especially at that case, in this case, we had most of our cast there. And so it was our chance to start discovering what the language we're going to use is when we finally go into the rehearsal room. James and Missy and Royce have been working together on the piece. They had a language that they shared. They were working on dramaturgical levels. And then for most of us, the cast, we had received the materials a couple weeks before the workshop began. So it's a room in which everybody enters extraordinarily nervous because we have 5 days to get it right. And it's complex music. And yes, we do want to get it right, but far more important is the exploration process, because there's going to be lots and lots of discussion time afterwards. Say, oh, well, that wasn't quite right, but we understand how that's going to work. But what are the verbs? What are the nouns? What are the adjectives that we use when we wrestle with this material? So I find for my process, it's important to, yes, come in ready to hit the ground and get it all right. But then once we're in the room, try to put all that aside and just be as curious as possible, as patient as possible with the process, and say, oh, yeah, that's a mistake. Let's go back. We'll do it again. But along the way, instead of the what is it supposed to be, really try to keep throwing the questions into why is it supposed to be that? Why is she saying that to him? Why is there that pause there? Because then that information that comes back from Missy, from Royce, from the actors, from James, that feeds into all the musical preparation that I've done. I was like, oh, I see. Well, in that case, then that chord, we can bite into that chord a little bit more. So that process of being as curious as possible is delightful and fun. And then when we finally get into the room for the premiere, for the rehearsal process, it feels like we already are miles and miles and miles ahead. Not just in, oh, we know how this piece goes, but we know how to work together on it. We can hit the ground running in a way that, in some ways, a cast coming together for a standard repertoire piece doesn't get the luxury of doing.
And for my ear, just a greater capacity for interpretation and nuance in the rehearsal, and you've already had the orchestra for a rehearsal for this work in rehearsal time.
Several sessions with the orchestra players. So then that's the other thing. As soon as you get those players in the room, be it 5, 10, 14, 15, 70, then the primary job is to just get them to play as much as possible. Missy and I can go away and talk about it as much as we want over drinks after rehearsal when nobody's getting paid to be there. But let's just play, play, play. Okay, good. Anything we want to do differently? Great. Let's go back. Let's play it again. Let's explore it. Because players of this caliber who play opera together, who play together all the time and play specifically for Opera Philadelphia, their learning curve isn't curved, it's just vertical. So the first time they play, it's like, oh, boom, they get it. And you see the lights go on in their eyes, and you go, okay, great. Then the next time you play it, it is 4 times as deep as before. And if we have a chance to say, oh, wait a second, you know what, that da-dee-dum, that's the sexual awakening. That is that happy best theme. So here it's happy. If you hear it later, it's probably sad, but she's remembering being happy. And that information that they play with brings out all the personality. When we have a small band like this, it's 15 in our pit, right?
Yeah.
14 plus electric guitar.
As you do in opera.
So like 25. Every personality of the orchestral player is drawn upon. So if we can get them to play with their own personality, bring what they offer as musicians, as artists to the team, then we've doubled the size of our company, and the musical richness is just magnified.
That is illuminating, I hope, for everybody.
So
it certainly
keep
is
doing those orchestra workshops.
Yes, I keep getting those memos. More orchestra time. Maybe if you could talk to us about your excitement about doing this project, because you know Missy's music, and tell us help the room have some perspective on on Missy's.
Well, yes, I do know Missy's music from exposure to a lot of her chamber music, and from having had my hands on Song from the Uproar many times now. But I must say that when this score arrived and I opened it up and I started unwrapping it, I felt like I was meeting a very new composer, and in kind of wonderful, surprising ways. And a lot of that, I think, comes from the material. The text, the story of this is so vastly different than that of Isabel Eberhardt in Song from the Uproar. The culture, everything that they've talked about of location and these incredibly complex people, these people that you would point to and say, well, there's the bad guy. And you go, well, no, actually, that's not, I see exactly why that person is doing that. So they're not the bad guy, they're just really, really complex. All of that is wrapped up in the piece. So it was exciting to look at the way these scenes that I've watched the movie once, but to recognize portions of the text and see then where they diverged, see where they were pared down to allow the music room. But to see how Missy had imagined very, very deeply what was going to be going on the stage. What is the temperature of that room at that moment? How does what that person say change the temperature in the room? What kind of time is needed before? It's a very kind of naturalistic theater feel about the piece in all of its operatic gravitas and angst, but the moment-to-moment of each person's thought process, how they are going to articulate these lines has been carefully crafted by her. There's no question, there's a lot of room for interpretation, but there's no question that there is a lot of thought about why is that word stressed, why does it go up there, why is that staccato, why is that then piano. There's just detail and calligraphy throughout the piece in that way. And then there's this natural sense. It would be easy to say intuitive, except that would then imply that it was easy for her to have done, and I'm not even going to guess that. But this facile way of using the orchestra to change the temperature in that room. I found in my course of studying this piece and preparing it, I started looking at things in an entirely different way. I started marking my score differently. I started analyzing phrases in a different way. Not looking for, oh, there's that harmonic shift, because the harmonic layerings are intense. There's majors and minors going on simultaneously, and just when one resolves to a major, the other is going to go to a minor. So there's not that structure to it, but I find throughout the bass, the cello, the bassoon have these lines that will extend for 7, 8 measures. And you realize that that's actually the phrase structure, even though there are all these different textures going on top of it. And then when you look at that, then I would block that off and I'd look and I'd say, oh yeah, and that's when the temperature changes. So there's this wonderfully kaleidoscopic musical language that transpires through the entire piece. It's hard to, like that duet, Your Body, is the longest, I would say, arc of a piece in the opera, and then other fragments. It's very dark, very natural, very, in some ways, expressionistic. It's like Janacek wrote an opera. Like Janacek lived now and wrote an opera about culture and society and mothers and death and sex.
She's like, yes. Well, with that, why don't we hear some of this music?
Okay.
Royce, do you want to introduce the next piece?
Yeah, okay, so this is Act 2 now, and we are privy to a conversation between Bess and Jan, where Jan tells Bess that you should we've only been married a short while, you deserve to have a partner who can move his arms and move his legs and go and experience life. I don't want you to be sitting by my bedside and just withering away. And she has a huge outburst where she basically says, I am your wife, and I am like, we are together, we are joined in God. And so she leaves and goes and seeks spiritual counsel from the minister at the church. And when she comes back, Dodo and Jan have had a talk where Jan has tried to grab some pills, where we find out that he actually has a little bit of facility with his arm and hand, and he tries to grab a bottle of pills and spills them all over the floor. And Dodo says that he implores Dodo to help him die. And Dodo says, no, yours is a life that is lived with Bess. So you can do whatever, but know that she is there, and she is always going to be there. And so he interprets this, that he should encourage her to go and seek other lovers, and then come back to she should come back to his bedside and tell him about the encounters. And he says that through that, it will feel like they're together. In Act 1, we actually see them have phone sex. He calls from the rig. And so he knows that she's capable of sort of an awkward exchange in that regard. And so using that, he sets her on the course of the rest of the act in Act 3. And so this is the conversation he has when he asks her to go and take other lovers.
Great. Thank you. Maestro.
it will be, because love cannot keep me alive. I lied to you best.
We did. You are forgiven.
When I told you to take another lover, I lied to you best.
You are forgiven.
You don't understand. It's not for your sake, Bess. You must love for my sake. I can hardly remember what it's like to make love. When I forget, I'll die.
Please don't. Please don't. Please don't.
When I called
Please
the
don't.
ring,
Please don't
how we make
die.
love without being together.
I want to talk to you again like that. I'm touching the brick. You're so huge. You're so
Find a man to make love to. Then come back to me and tell me what it's like. It will feel like we were together. Yes. Love will keep me alive.
can't.
If you love me, do this for my sake, Bess, not for yours. Do this for me.
Like we're together.
Two people joined in God. Mr. and Mrs.
And Mrs.
Gone from the ring.
And God.
Find a man and tell me what it's like. Find a man, yes. It will feel like
Like we're
Thank you all. So we need to create a world for this to happen. It's a stage. It's not a film studio. James Darr, our director, has been an integral part of the process of creating this work. He's assembled a great team. Let's hear a little bit about your team, and then we can hear about the process and what it might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. I like going last. It's like, okay, it's all awesome. Now you have to do it. And what do we do? The first thing is it's great to hear so much of the music, I think, and hear about the music, because I think for me, the initial involvement with this was one of the people that Missy and I have in common is composer John Adams, and who had said to us individually, to me, James, there'll come a time where you hear someone's music, and it happened to me. Someone heard my music and was a director and basically was like, I want to work on your work. And I was like, oh, I can't wait for that. That's going to be amazing. And I'm in Los Angeles. I live in Los Angeles, and I was working at the Los Angeles Philharmonic on a few projects, and one of the things that they were doing was it was like a 5-hour-long new works concert with 10 composers and all of these things. I was like, I'm going to go to that. And I sat through the whole thing, all 5 hours, multiple conductors. It was epic, Wagnerian in scale, and I got to after the third intermission, I was sitting in the theater, and Missy Mazzoli had a piece. And it was her only piece in the program. And I'm going to butcher the title, but it was something like Piece for Orbital Spheres. But as far as I was concerned, it was called Piece for Awesome.
What was it really called, Missy?
Or something.
Symphonia for Orbiting Spheres.
I was so close. It was close. But I sat there and had a total panic attack, and I, in the best sense possible, I completely was overwhelmed with images in my brain and felt like a crazy person. I wanted to draw. I just was completely charged up, and I ran backstage and was like, get out of my way, get out of my way. And I found somebody that I knew and was like, who wrote that piece? And he's like, oh, that's Missy Mazzoli. She's right there. I'm like, oh, she looks really cool. Okay, introduce us. And he was like, yeah. He's like, oh, she's writing this opera on breaking the waves. And I was like, that's a terrible idea. Why is she writing an opera on breaking the waves? It's so perfect. It's an amazing movie. And I met her, and I was like, I'm totally thrilled by your music. And we talked. And when I became involved in this, I heard some of it, and we started talking about it. And what I realized was that Breaking the Waves as a film, I think, is perfect in a lot of ways, and it tells the story kind of with filmic language that is really brilliant, and it's intimate, and it's quiet, and everyone is, you imagine on set they were talking about this loud at all times, and it's this incredible film. And her piece used it as a jumping off point to go almost in some ways in a totally different direction with exploring what that story was. And when we started, and then of course I was like, that sounds incredibly hard and impossible, so I'm totally in. Okay, what are we gonna do? And so you're catching me. We just finished staging today, and we had orchestra stuff this morning, so we're literally mid-process. And I have to say that the music and what it explored was, for me, if you're here because you're an opera person, I guarantee there was some point where you sat in a theater and this weird, bizarre thing of powering the human voice, unamplified. Opera's a total freak show, and I totally fell in love with it when I was a teenager. And it's just an incredible thing. And if you love opera, you've experienced that, and then you sort of spend your whole life chasing that elusive feeling that you had in the theater. And I thought, oh, what an amazing idea to find what that version is for Breaking the Waves. Because the film, and certainly Lars von Trier, evokes a visceral gut response when you watch the films, even though the performance isn't people powering their voice in the same way. And I was really intrigued by that, and then instantly thought, okay, we have to have designers to create a world that makes this piece make sense. And her music and where it went was expressionist, as Stephen mentioned, but also was, to me, this really interesting fever dream of an opera. And I say that in the best way. It completely takes the story and goes in this direction that is visceral and evocative and full of real human beings, but also full of unexpected beauty and sexuality and these kind of potent themes. So the designers that we assembled were all people that I had worked with before, and they actually all come from various backgrounds. And the first person that I talked to was set designer Adam Rigg, who is our New Yorker. He's here in New York and was doing a lot of theater. And this is actually his operatic debut, which I found out, which is really exciting. And he instantly delved into research, of which there's thousands of images, and you're seeing two. But these were kind of the first two that we started with, which were him just pulling things that felt like both the story, but maybe more importantly, like Missy's music that we had heard, and like the piece, and we read Royce's treatment of the libretto, and we kind of assembled what direction to go with the stage space. And this is, I decided rather than showing you finished renderings, this was kind of one of our early white models. So you're seeing it without lighting or anything on it, and you're just seeing a black sort of placeholder scale person. But what we eventually arrived at, in short, was, well, why not frame the whole piece within a unit set that is a blank canvas to showcase these characters, but is also capable of evoking the feeling of the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The minute I realized if I tried to recreate the Isle of Skye, I would probably end up putting something that looked like a Disneyland attraction on stage, in which it's a slippery slope the minute I put anything that feels literal about Scotland on the stage. And instead, Adam created a space that evokes the coastline, and where large structural elements like a seawall or horizon lines meet waves and water and rocks. Every single surface you're looking at in this white model takes projection, including the entire floor. So, so what you're seeing here is our in-process. The projection designer I work with a lot, Adam Larson, who's really brilliant, is busy right now in Philadelphia with ink and oil in water and filming it in a dark room in the middle of Philadelphia somewhere. So
Like in Shark Tanks,
in
like
Shark
putting
Tanks,
water
like we're
and
basically,
ink in it.
we kind of decided to create an ever-shifting landscape that could both evoke the places and the sense of place, but also create an entirely unique abstracted environment that doesn't compromise characters. So all of the characters are really rooted in time and place. They're rooted in the early 70s. For that, I chose two renderings. The costume designer, Chrissy Carvanides, is a good friend of mine in Los Angeles, and really, in addition to theater, comes from a big film and TV background, and was doing things. I had seen her work on HBO, like Carnival, which I thought was very theatrical, and she did American Horror Story, which is certainly very theatrical, and she had been working on these pieces that were theater in the TV format. And with Breaking the Waves, I said, we need somebody who can watch that film and get it, but who also thinks character-driven and also expressionistically. So what she's designed for this piece, I think mirrors what Missy and Royce have created, which is, on the left you see we have something as simple as a knit dress that Bess wears later on that reveals her figure more when she sort of is becoming this sexually awakened being. And on the right, you see something that actually comes up as the piece increases, the psychology of it and the flow of the scenes. Missy writes musically what I equate to a dream state. So in a dream, I might be sitting at a table with you and you're looking at me, and then you turn to the right and the person that was there is gone, and there's suddenly a door that opens up into the middle of the Mojave Desert. I mean, in dreams, the sense of time and location and place is completely surreal, and her music does that. It moves from a church surrounded by elders, and within 2 bars of music, Bess is suddenly in the hospital next to her husband, and then in 2 bars later, her mother appears and is the voice of shame in her head, and then that person disappears. And what's incredible is the piece starts out very linearly and structurally and blurs as it goes on. And I tasked Chrissy with basically not only creating character-driven costumes that we believe would have existed in Scotland in the 70s, but also Bess appears at the top of Act 3 in her wedding dress, which is now completely soaked in oil from the oil rig. So it becomes, and the entire bodies of the male people that she's been sleeping with throughout town appear and are touching this dress, and we go into this completely other realm at the beginning of Act 3 as the piece kind of rockets toward its conclusion. The psychology of this woman that we follow through the evening becomes increasingly fractured, and through the use of design, increasingly beautiful, but also upsetting and evocative. To see the exact same wedding dress you remember from Act 1 when there was actually a shred of hope, I feel like, in her life. This kind of destruction of that and how that evolves. So every design element in the show has been approached with a lot of thought to both preserve the story, but also to treat the material, what they've created is something that I view as really less of an adaptation. I'm not really interested directorially in competing with Lars von Trier, and I'm also I'm not interested really in just putting a film that you can go home and watch on the opera stage. Where it's the same situations and then people just sing and we sort of are supposed to buy that. I wanted to make sense of why turn this into an opera? Why take Breaking the Waves and make an opera out of it? And to explore psychology and interiority and thought and make that theatrical and explore this story of a woman in a sense where you have the entirety of Act 1 is one take, as opposed to using cuts or any of the language of film. You have this long arc of the entire cast, all of which are amazing, but primarily Missy's opera really zooms in on Bess, and we almost get to the end and wonder where the lines between fiction and reality are, and where what's being blurred in terms of what's actually happening versus what's psychologically been brewing in her. And for the creative team, that's a really exciting place to create things and to keep our hands on the pulse of story, but also create, I think, a visual world that feels operatic in scale, but also sort of intensely personal and intimate at the same time.
So why don't you cue up the next selection, which is from the beginning of that scene you just talked about.
Yeah, I'm excited about this because we have the amazing Keira Duffy singing Bess, who you've seen, and also Patricia Schumann, who's Bess's mother. And the Act 3 was sort of being written when I got involved. And the act opens, as I mentioned, in this kind of image of her psychologically, and all of the accumulation of all of the events of the previous two acts kind of fracture in this moment. And what you're about to hear is the very beginning of one of the longest scenes in the opera in terms of multiple characters. And it's the first time in the opera where every single member of the ensemble is on stage. And they sort of accumulate over time. But this, you get the voice of Bess's mother in her head, mixed also with her in reality. So you're hearing both what Bess is hearing from her mother versus what she's anchoring into and why she's choosing to act and keep active, mixed with, I think, kind of an interesting level of psychosis and psychology that gets thrown in right here.
Maestro, shall we begin?
Yes.
We have one more selection, but before then, I would like to invite you all to Philadelphia. We're 70 minutes away by train. That's the Acela. The regional's 90 minutes. And we have a beautiful theater, the Perlman Theater. And I hope you're enamored with the work, that you will think that it would be good to come and join us for the premiere in Philadelphia, and then see it again in New York as part of the Prototype Festival, an amazing festival here in the city that's really, truly should be supported by all of you. I also would like to thank the Guggenheim Works and Process for extending an invitation south for us to join you here. This is the first time we've really played any of this publicly, so we're kind of all family now. This is something that you do in a very trusting, only with trusting relationships, so thank you to the Guggenheim, and to our wonderful orchestra of quartet and the two-fisted orchestra, Lisa Keller. And all the performers who have come here right after a rehearsal, and we'll be back at it tomorrow. I think they all did a tremendous, tremendous job. Absolutely. So, Missy, why don't you set up the epilogue?
My turn.
It's your turn. You
so
wrote
we've
the
given
opera.
You,
You get the final word.
we've given you sort of really a lot from every different part of the opera. You heard the very beginning, these sort of very key moments. Now you're hearing the very last aria, this epilogue, and the last word is Yuans. And he, at this point, Bess has died. Sorry, spoiler, it's an opera, she dies. And she's given a sinner's funeral by these Calvinists. And someone, I won't give this part away, but someone intervenes in this funeral in a very interesting and fun way, which is a very fun scene to write. So you come to Philadelphia and see it. But then her body, her sister-in-law and Jan and his friends steal her body because they're determined to not let her be buried in a sinner's grave. And instead they go out on the oil rig, they take her body out on the rig, and they throw it into the ocean. And Jan sings this final love song. So I'd like to welcome back the amazing John Moore.
Yes.
Come